Hello dear students, welcome to this series of lectures in botany, and today our topic is evolution of gymnosperms. Let me first of all give you a brief introduction of gymnosperms. The gymnosperms, commonly known as naked-seeded plants, form vast forests that have dominated the landscape for more than 200 million years now. There are four divisions of gymnosperms: Cycadophyta, commonly called as cycads; Ginkgophyta, represented by the single genus Ginkgo; Gnetophyta; and Coniferophyta, including the conifers. The largest division, the conifers, are almost all large trees and include pines, firs, spruces, junipers and redwoods, etc. Although there are only about 590 species or around 600 species, conifers dominate vast forest regions, especially in the northern hemisphere. And cycadophytes have less than 300 species, followed by Gnetophyta with more than 60 or 70 species, and Ginkgophyta just represented by single species Ginkgo biloba. So overall, gymnosperms have less than 1000 species, and Anthophyta or angiosperms have more than 250,000 species. Gymnosperms comprise the longest lived organisms, for example Pinus longiva, which is more than 5000 years old. They comprise the largest single organisms by volume also, with a volume of more than 1500 cubic meters, and include tallest organisms with the length of more than 115 meters, and even toughest organisms. And despite the fact that 4 of the 5 divisions of seed plants are gymnosperms, including cycads, ginkgo, nettles and conifers, yet compared to angiosperms, Anthophyta, little is known about the patterns of diversification and evolution, especially genome evolution of the gymnosperms. And the bias for the gymnosperms is evident from the fact that all complete genome sequencing projects have hitherto focused on angiosperms, mainly cereals including rice, maize, sorghum and others such as Arabidopsis and Medicago, etc. Well, in the present lecture our specific focus will be on gymnosperms with respect to their brief sketch of characteristics and evolutionary trends, then discussion of progymnosperms as precursors of the gymnosperms. We will be then discussing about extinct gymnosperms, followed by the discussion of living gymnosperms. So for the first question is concerned, what are the important characteristics and evolutionary trends in gymnosperms? Gymnosperms do not constitute an evolutionary line equivalent to that of angiosperms, but represent a series of evolutionary lines of seed-bearing plants lacking distinctive characteristics of flowering plants. Notwithstanding that there are only around less than 1000 species of living gymnosperms in comparison to more than 235,000 species of angiosperms, yet individual gymnosperms are often dominant over wide areas. One of the fundamental reasons of dominance of gymnosperms is the seed habit. Since their first appearance in the late Devonian, gymnosperms and other seed plants have come to dominate almost every terrestrial ecosystem, encompassing a greater range of habitat and habit than any other group of tracheophytes. The evolutionary success of spermatophytes, seed plants, generally stems from their reproductive systems involving seeds, which facilitated these plants to exploit habitats not accessible to most lower vascular plants. The seed habit and vegetative traits such as production of wood by secondary meristem, cambium, what you call as, contributed decisively to the evolutionary success of the gymnosperms and angiosperms as well. Please note that the ancestor of gymnosperm was a heterosporous. They were heterospores, and the evolution of heterospory was a significant development because it led to the evolution of the seeds. Seeds are better than spores because spores not only have a short lifetime but also are thinner walled and more vulnerable to pathogens and damage than the seeds are. In contrast, seed coat provides protection and gametophytic tissue provides nourishment for developing embryo, which due to dormancy can wait for a long time to germinate when conditions are good or satisfactory. The seed habit differs from free sporing heterospory fundamentally in that it facilitated delivery of the male gametophyte directly into the female gametophyte through pollination, thereby bypassing the free release of the female into the environment and thus the environmental limitations placed on the free sporing system by water mediated fertilization. In addition to the seed habit, which is common in angiosperms and gymnosperms, in contrast to angiosperms, gymnosperms have rare polyploidy, more conserved chromosome numbers. They have long lifespan, low species numbers, low net morphological change, wind-based pollination by and large, and they are mainly generalists, not specialists, and they have relatively speaking less variation in C-value range as well. Now, let's talk about progymnosperms, which are regarded as the precursors of the gymnosperms, from which gymnosperms have evolved. So, for the origin of gymnosperms is concerned, gymnosperms, the first group of plants to develop seeds probably evolved from a heterosporous group called as progymnosperms in the Devonian period around 408 to 360 million years before. First gymnosperms lacked seeds but had developed them by the end of the Devonian. So for the radiation of gymnosperms is concerned, they coexisted with the bryophytes, ferns and other seedless vascular plants, but their adaptive radiations occurred during the Carboniferous and early Permian, around 360 to 245 million years ago, when the climate became warmer and drier. Gymnosperms are the dominant plants during the age of dinosaurs, Mesozoic era, around 245 to 65 million years before. Hence, sometimes this era is also called as the age of gymnosperms. Progymnosperms, what comprises the phylum Progymnospermophyta, a group of plants that existed in the late Paleozoic era with intermediate characteristics between those of seedless vascular trimerophytes and those of the seed plants. Although the progymnosperms reproduce through freely dispersed spores, they resembled living conifers in the production of wood, secondary xylem. And amongst the woody Devonian plants, progymnosperms were quite unique in that they also produced secondary phloem. It's believed that both the progymnosperms and Paleozoic ferns probably evolved from the more ancient trimerophytes, from which they, however, differed primarily in possessing more elaborate and more highly differentiated branch systems and correspondingly more complex vascular systems. The most significant evolutionary advance of progymnosperms were both trimerophytes and the ferns is the presence of bifacial vascular cambium, which produces both secondary xylem and secondary phloem. This type of vascular cambium, which is characteristic of seed plants, evolved first in the progymnosperms. And notable progymnosperms include, for your information, Aneurophyton type and Archaeopteryx type. So for the Aneurophyton type progymnosperms are concerned, they occurred in the Devonian period, approximately 360 to 380 million years ago, and are characterized by three-dimensional branching pattern. They possessed a solid slender of vascular tissue or protostele. And in view of resemblance of branching system of Aneurophyton type progymnosperms to early seed ferns, some paleobotanists consider the later as their precursors. The best example of Aneurophyton type progymnosperm is Triboxylon ashlandicum. So for the Archaeopteryx type are concerned, they appeared in the Devonian period some 370 million years ago and extended up to the Mississippian period about 340 million years ago. Lateral branch system were flattened in one plane and they bore laminar structures considered to be nowadays leaves. An evolutionary advanced type of stele called as U stele, characterized by the arrangement of vascular tissue in discrete strands around pith, apparently evolved in this group of progymnosperms. This strong similarity links this group with the living seed plants. Unlike most progymnosperms which were homosporous, some species of Archaeopteryx were heterosporous, a further evolutionary advancement in this group. And the best example you can say is Archaeopteryx macilenta. Notwithstanding that enough evidence has accumulated over the years for seed plants having been evolved from the progymnosperms after the appearance of seed, still many problems remain to be solved in fully understanding the early evolution of seed plants, or including gymnosperms. Now, let's talk about the extinct gymnosperms. They generally include Pteridospermophyta, chordatails and cycadioids. So for the Pteridospermophyta is concerned, they are also called as seed ferns or pteridosperms, a highly diverse and relatively unnatural group that range in age from the Devonian to Jurassic. And in form, they range from late Devonian slender branched plants with ovules such as Elkinsia and Archaeosperma to tree-like carboniferous plants such as Medulosa. Chordatails are primitive conifer-like plants. How exactly different groups of seed ferns are linked to living gymnosperms is still not clearly known. Cycadioids or Benititails, they are consisting of plants with palm-like leaves, somewhat resembling the living cycads. Benititails are an enigmatic group of Mesozoic gymnosperms that disappeared from the fossil records during the Cretaceous period. Though the exact phylogenetic position of Benititails is still uncertain, some paleobotanists believe that they might have been the members of the same evolutionary line as angiosperms. Though Benititails lived in the same time as extinct cycads and both produced almost similar leaves, they were, however, reproductively distinct from cycads in several respects, such as the presence of flower-like reproductive structures that were bisexual in some species. Now, let's focus on living gymnosperms, also called as modern gymnosperms. As I said earlier, gymnosperms have naked seeds that are not enclosed in an ovary as angiosperm seeds are, but their ovules and seeds are exposed on the surface of sporophylls and are such analogous structures. There are 4 phyla of gymnosperms with living representatives. Cycadophyta, the cycads commonly known as, Ginkgophyta, represented by ginkgo, Coniferophyta, conifers, what we commonly call as, and Gnetophyta, or commonly called as gnetophytes. Cycads are represented by about more than 140 species in 11 genera and 2 families, which are palm-like plants with trunks and sludge growth, and are characterized by those palm-like leaves and large cones. Cycads appeared at least 250 million years ago during the Permian period and became so numerous in Mesozoic era that this period is often called as the age of cycads and dinosaurs. They are distributed mainly in the Old World tropics, extending away from the equator to warm tropics. Ginkgo, so far as concerned, or the ginkgophytes, just one species, Ginkgo biloba, commonly termed as maidenhair tree, is the only living member of the phylum Ginkgophyta. This is unknown in wild but is known only in the cultivation practices. And previously it has been very widespread plant species but is very rare nowadays. Ginkgo biloba has changed very little for more than 150 million years of evolution. It's called sometimes popularly as a living fossil. Its living members share features with other gymnosperm genera of Permian era, some 270 million years ago. And it's characterized by a fleshy seed coat. Quite often this plant is planted as a street tree. So far the conifers are concerned, they are having more than 600 species distributed in 7 families and comprise the largest and most widespread phylum of gymnosperms. Most important gymnosperms including pines, spruce, fir, cedar, etc., they have dominated many plant communities throughout the world and are right now also doing so, especially in the wide stretches of the northern hemisphere. They are having complex seed cones and their needled leaves have the specific function of reduction in the water loss. And gnetophytes, represented by around 90 species in 3 living genera, Gnetum, Epihydra and Welwitschia, they have angiosperm-like features. From an evolutionary standpoint, gnetophytes comprise an important link and transition to the evolution of angiosperms from gymnosperms. And let me tell you, double fertilization, unique characteristic of angiosperms, also occurs in Epihydra, suggesting thereby that common ancestry of gymnosperms and angiosperms is there somewhere. The 4 living gymnosperms that we talked about, Coniferophyta, Cycadales, Ginkgoales and Gnetales, or Coniferales, they are morphologically so highly divergent from one another that their evolutionary relationships have been still uncertain. There are at least 3 different viewpoints regarding their evolution. First, from the morphological data, it is proposed that the Coniferales and Ginkgoales are sister groups, and accordingly, Page in 1990 classified the extant gymnosperms into 2 subdivisions: Coniferophytina, which included Coniferales and Ginkgoales, and Cycadophytina, which includes Cycadales and Gnetales. Second viewpoint, some researchers are of different viewpoint and they have drawn a different conclusion from the morphological data. They regard the coniferales and ginkgoales as two separate groups and consider cycadales as the most archaic seed plants. Third viewpoint, on the basis of the chloroplast and nuclear DNA sequences, it is suggested that the conifers and cycads form a clade representing the earliest lineage among seed plants. In addition to uncertainty about interordinal relationships, the interfamilial relationships within each gymnosperm order are also controversial. Another important question is whether gymnosperms are paraphyletic or monophyletic. On the basis of the morphological and fossil data, many authors have suggested that the gymnosperms are paraphyletic, arguing that the ancestor of angiosperms was derived from a certain gymnosperm lineage, presumably including Mesozoic Benititales, Glossopteridales or the Netiales. The last view, from the Netiales, was affirmed by cladistic analysis of morphological data and parsimony analysis of the partial nuclear 18S and 26S ribosomal RNAs and chloroplast gene sequences and combined morphological and molecular data. However, in contrast to the above viewpoint, phylogenetic analysis of 5S ribosomal RNA sequences, partial fragments of the small subunits of the nuclear and the plastid ribosomal RNAs, RBCL gene sequences and chloroplast intergenic spacer sequences have suggested that the extant gymnosperms are monophyletic, implying that none of the extant gymnosperm lineages is a direct ancestor of angiosperms. On this basis, it has been suggested that the ancestral form of angiosperms should be searched for from amongst the progymnosperms. So, dear students, the key points that we have learned in the present lecture include that notwithstanding that there are only about 720 or more than 700 species of living gymnosperms in comparison to more than 2,35,000 species of angiosperms, yet individual gymnosperms are often dominant over the wide areas. And one of the fundamental reasons of dominance of gymnosperms is the seed habit. And gymnosperms were the dominant plants during the age of dinosaurs. And another point is that progymnosperms comprise the precursors of gymnosperms from which they have evolved. Then pteridospermophyta, that means the seed ferns or pteridosperms, corditails, that means primitive conifer-like plants, and cycadioids or benititales, they represent the extinct gymnosperms. Another point is that there are 4 phyla of gymnosperms with living representatives, including Cycadophyta, Ginkgophyta, Coniferophyta and Netophyta, of which conifers are the most widespread, and ginkgo is the living fossil and the only representative of its phylum, while as Netophytes have the angiosperm affinities and form a bridge between gymnosperms and the angiosperms. However, the 4 living gymnosperm orders, these coniferales, cycadales, ginkgoales and Netiales, are morphologically highly divergent from one another, so that their evolutionary relationships have been uncertain. On the basis of morphological and fossil data, we have learned that many authors suggest that gymnosperms are paraphyletic, while as molecular phylogenetic analyses suggests that the extant gymnosperms are monophyletic. So, with this, I take leave of you right now. Until we meet in the next lecture.